The wind howled like a wounded animal outside the glass walls of the Manhattan penthouse. But inside, the air was colder. Lillian Voss stood in the marble foyer, clutching a single designer suitcase, her breath visible in the unheated space. The locks on every door clicked simultaneously. Remote, mechanical, final. Her husband, Alexander Voss, the man whose face graced Forbes covers and whose net worth hovered at $32 billion, had just frozen her out. Literally, every account linked to her name. Joint checking, credit cards, investment portfolios, even the charity foundation she chaired, flashed the same message on her phone. Access denied, pending review. The prenup she'd signed 15 years ago, in the blush of young love, had a clause he'd never mentioned. In the event of marital discord, he could unilaterally restrict her financial access until mediation. He'd triggered it at midnight. Lillian's fingers trembled as she dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. The doorman downstairs had been instructed not to let her back in if she left. The driver had been reassigned. Her friend's lines rang busy. She later learned he'd had his assistant call them first, spinning a tale of her erratic behavior and temporary separation for her health. She was 38, beautiful by any standard, once the darling of society pages. Now she stood in couture that suddenly felt like costume, with exactly $43 in cash and a dead phone battery. Alexander sat 3 miles away in his midtown office, staring at the security feed of her standing lost in the foyer. His chest ached, but he crushed the feeling. She'd lied about the trips, the late nights, the girls' weekends that weren't. He'd found messages, photos, proof that she'd been emotionally unfaithful for over a year with a man he'd once called friend. This wasn't revenge, he told himself. This was protection. Of his empire. Of his heart. But as he watched her finally walk out into the snow without a coat, he'd had the thermostat lowered remotely. Something cracked inside him. Not regret. Not yet. Just the first hairline fracture in the ice he'd built around himself. Across the country, in a quiet audit firm in Seattle, 25-year-old Mia Harlow opened an anonymous envelope. Inside, a flash drive and a note in typed font. Look into Voss Family Trusts. You'll find what you're looking for. No signature. No return address. Mia had been searching for her birth father for 6 years. Ever since her adoptive parents died. The trail had gone cold until this package. She plugged the drive in. Heart pounding. Files opened. Offshore accounts. Adoption records sealed by the best lawyers money could buy. DNA reports. And at the center, Alexander Voss. She was his daughter. Born from a brief affair before he'd married Lillian. Paid off. Hidden. Erased. The hook tightened. 3 lives. 1 empire. About to collide. Mia stared at the screen until dawn. The glow illuminating her tiny Seattle apartment. The evidence was overwhelming. Trust documents funneling millions into a scholarship fund under her adoptive mother's maiden name. Money that had paid for her upbringing. Her college. Alexander had never abandoned her financially. But emotionally? Completely. She printed everything. Hands shaking. Revenge flickered. Expose him. Watch the empire burn. But something else stirred. Curiosity. Who was this man who'd erased her yet quietly funded her dreams? In New York, Lillian had spent her first night in a cheap hotel under an assumed name, paying cash for 1 night only. By morning, her cards were still frozen. She called the only person she thought might help. Her lawyer. He apologized profusely. Alexander had fired the firm that week. New counsel had been retained. For him, desperation tasted metallic. She walked the streets, snow soaking through her thin boots, until she found herself outside a women's shelter in Brooklyn. The intake worker, A kind-eyed woman named Rosa gave her a hot meal and a cot. No questions, just kindness. That night, Lillian cried for the first time in years. Not for the money, but for the humiliation. For the version of herself she'd lost somewhere between charity galas and private jets. Alexander couldn't sleep. He told himself it was vigilance. Monitoring the accounts. Ensuring she couldn't drain anything. But really, he kept pulling up the penthouse security feeds. Empty rooms, her coat still hanging in the closet. He drank scotch he didn't taste. Then the email came. Anonymous server. Subject: your daughter sends regards. Attachment: a single photo. Mia at her college graduation. Wearing the necklace he'd anonymously sent through the trust. His glass shattered against the wall. Mia had made her decision. Not exposure. Not yet. Blackmail. Quiet. Surgical. She would force him to unfreeze Lillian's assets. Restore everything. Without ever knowing why. And in exchange? She wanted one thing. Acknowledgement. A meeting. The truth. Her first message was simple. Restore full access to Lillian Voss's accounts by Friday. Or the world learns about the child you buried. Alexander's security team traced it. In vain. Burner accounts. Encrypted routing. He could have ignored it. Fought it. But the photo haunted him. Those eyes. His mother's eyes. Friday came. He sat at his desk. Cursor hovering over the release command. Pride screamed no. Something deeper whispered yes. He pressed enter. Lillian's phone buzzed in the shelter common room. Balance restored. Cards active. Everything back as if nothing happened. She stared. Tears falling onto the screen. Why now? After the cruelty? She didn't know it yet. But the ice had begun to thaw. Mia watched the transaction logs through a back door she'd built into the trust monitoring system. Confirmation came at 11:59 p.m. He'd done it. Exactly as instructed. Her next message went out immediately. Good. Now compensate the Harlem Youth Center for the grant you withdrew last year. Full amount plus interest, then we talk. Alexander read it in his darkened office. City lights glittering below like scattered diamonds. The Harlem Center. He remembered pulling that funding to punish a board member who'd sided against him in a vote. Petty. Childish. He authorized the transfer before dawn. Rosa at the shelter noticed Lillian's change. The way she no longer flinched at sudden noises. The quiet phone checks that brought relief instead of dread. Someone looking out for you? Rosa asked gently. Lillian shook her head. I don't know anymore. But she was starting to wonder. Alexander had always been ruthless in business. But never cruel without purpose. This freeze had been personal. The sudden reversal felt coerced. She booked a modest hotel uptown. Her card worked again. And hired a private investigator. Discreet. Expensive. The kind who could trace digital shadows. Mia, meanwhile, wrestled with her own storm. Every act of forced kindness from Alexander chipped at her anger. The man who'd paid for her braces. Her debate club trips. Her everything. Yet never sent a birthday card. She needed to see him. Not through screens. Face to face. Her third demand. Meet me. Central Park. Bethesda Fountain. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Come alone. Or the files go to every major outlet. Alexander stared at the message for hours. Trap? Setup? His security chief begged to send a team. He refused. He would go alone. Lillian's investigator called that same night. Mrs. Voss. There's unusual activity in your husband's accounts. Large transfers. Not to you directly, but restorative. Like he's cleaning up old messes. And someone's pulling his strings. Who? Quote, can't trace yet, but they know things only an insider would. Lillian's heart pounded. An insider. Someone Alexander feared. As snow began to fall again over the city, 3 lives moved inexorably toward collision. Alexander toward a daughter he'd never held. Lillian toward truths she wasn't sure she wanted. Mia toward a father whose empire she now held in her palm. None of them slept that night. Alexander arrived at Bethesda Fountain 20 minutes early. Collar turned up against the biting wind. No security detail in sight. Central Park was dusted with fresh snow. Tourists sparse. The angel statue watching over the frozen water like a silent judge. He scanned every face. Joggers. Dog walkers. A vendor selling hot chestnuts. Waiting for the stranger who held his deepest secret. Mia watched him from a bench 50 yards away. Heart hammering so hard she feared he might hear it. She'd dyed her hair darker. Wore glasses she didn't need. A thrift store coat that swallowed her frame. Unrecognizable. She hoped. She needed to see him first. Unguarded. He looked older than the magazine covers. Tired. The lines around his eyes deeper. Shoulders carrying more than billions. For a moment, anger softened into something dangerously close to pity. At exactly 3 p.m., she stood and walked toward him. Alexander's breath caught, even with the disguise. He knew. The way she moved, graceful but deliberate, like his own mother in old photographs. The eyes. God. Those eyes. You came alone, she said. Stopping 5 feet away. Voice steady, though her hands shook in her pockets. You left me little choice. Mia's laugh was bitter. Choice? You've had choices your whole life. I've had consequences. He flinched. Who are you? Quote. You already know. She pulled out her phone. Showed him the graduation photo again. Mia Harlow. Born Mia Elizabeth Voss. March 12, 2000. Mother. Claire Harlow. Father. Alexander James Voss. You paid for the best lawyers to make sure no one ever connected the dots. The color drained from his face. He reached out instinctively, then stopped himself. How long have you known? Quote. Long enough to hate you. Not long enough to understand you. She stepped closer. I'm not here for money. I never was. But I've watched you punish Lillian for far less than what you did to me. Lillian cheated. Quote. Emotionally. With someone who listened when you stopped. Mia's voice cracked. You erased a child. That's not the same? Quote. Alexander looked away. Toward the frozen fountain. I was 28. Terrified of scandal. My father had just died. The company was fragile. Claire didn't want complications. We agreed. Quote. You agreed. She cried for years. Mia's eyes filled, but she refused to blink. I grew up wondering why my father never came. You sent money. Never you. Silence stretched between them, heavy as the snow beginning to fall again. I was ashamed, he whispered finally. Every birthday, every milestone. I knew, but I convinced myself distance was kindness. Mia shook her head. Kindness would have been a card. A phone call. Anything. He met her gaze. What do you want from me now? Quote. Watch you undo the damage you do to people. Starting with Lillian. Then others. I have a list. She handed him a folded paper. Names. Amounts. Wrongs from years past, and I want you to know me. Not as a threat. As your daughter. Alexander took the list with trembling fingers. And if I refuse? Quote. Then everything goes public. Not for revenge. For truth. He studied her face. Searching for resemblance. Finding it everywhere. You look like my mother. I know. I've seen pictures. A ghost of a smile. She would have loved you fiercely. Mia's throat tightened. Maybe you still can. Across the park. Hidden behind a cluster of trees. Lillian's private investigator snapped photos. High zoom lens. Clear shots of Alexander meeting a young woman. Intimate conversation. Handing something over. She couldn't hear words, but body language screamed secrets. He reported back within the hour. Lillian stared at the images in her hotel room. Stomach dropping. The woman was young, beautiful. Alexander's expression, raw, vulnerable, was one she hadn't seen in years. Was this why he'd unfrozen her accounts? Guilt over a new betrayal? She didn't cry this time. She got angry. That night, Alexander sat alone in his office. The list spread before him. 10 names. 10 wrongs. The Harlem Center was already done. Next, a former partner he'd forced out in the 90s, leaving him bankrupt. Amount, 20 million plus interest. He authorized the transfer. Mia received confirmation on her encrypted app. Another demand sent. Good. Now the partner from 98. Then we meet again. Lillian. Meanwhile, dug deeper. She hired a forensic accountant. Someone Alexander didn't control. Patterns emerged. Sudden restorative payments. All traceable to old disputes. And all starting after the freeze. Someone was forcing his hand. She needed to know who. Rosa at the shelter noticed Lillian's distraction. You're leaving us soon, she said gently over coffee. I don't belong here, Lillian admitted. But I'm grateful. You showed me kindness when I had nothing. Rosa smiled. Kindness costs little. Changes everything. Those words lingered as Lillian packed. She left an anonymous donation. 6 figures. To the shelter before checking out. Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Mia. Her voice. Her pain. His pain. For the first time in decades. He called his therapist. Not for strategy. But for help. I have a daughter, he confessed in the dark office. And I've lost her before I ever had her. Mia, back in Seattle, stared at flight listings to New York. She wasn't done. But hatred was tiring. Curiosity, and something softer, was growing. The investigator called Lillian again. The woman from the park? Traced her to Seattle. Name, Mia Harlow. Adopted. But get this. Her trust fund? Originated from a Voss shell company. Lillian's world tilted. A daughter? Hidden? Everything clicked. The freeze. The reversal. The payments. Alexander hadn't cheated emotionally. He'd been blackmailed. By his own past. Her anger shifted. Not gone. But complicated. She booked a flight to Seattle. 3 lives. Converging faster than any of them realized. Snow falling harder now. Covering tracks. Preparing for revelations that would shatter. And perhaps heal. The frozen empire. Lillian's flight touched down in Seattle under a steel gray sky. Rain streaking the windows like tears the city couldn't hold back. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Not her few remaining friends. Not the investigator. She'd booked the ticket under her maiden name. Paid cash for the hotel. For the first time in years. She moved without a trail of staff or paparazzi. She had one goal. Find Mia Harlow. The investigator had given her an address. A modest apartment building in Capitol Hill. Lillian sat in a rented car across the street for hours. Watching the entrance. At dusk, a young woman emerged. Dark hair. Glasses. Carrying a laptop bag. Even from a distance. Lillian saw it. The angle of the jaw. The way she walked with purpose. Alexander's features. Softened by youth and something gentler. Mia. Lillian's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Questions stormed. How long had Alexander known? Had he been supporting a secret family while freezing her out? Was the emotional cheating she'd committed any worse than this? But beneath the anger, something else bloomed. Curiosity. And an ache she couldn't name. Inside her apartment, Mia paced. The latest transfer had gone through. The 98 partner. Now elderly and living modestly in Florida. Suddenly receiving 32 million. Alexander hadn't hesitated. No counter demands. Just compliance. It unsettled her. She opened the encrypted chat. You're doing everything I ask. Why? Quote. His reply came faster than before. Because you're right. I've spent a lifetime protecting the wrong things. Mia stared at the words. Her throat tightened. She typed, "Meet me again. Same place. Tomorrow." "No. My home. The penthouse. Come for dinner. Alone. Dangerous. Reckless." But the pull was magnetic. She agreed. Alexander spent the day preparing. Not with staff, but himself. He cooked. Simple things. Roast chicken. Vegetables. The way his mother had taught him before wealth complicated everything. He dismissed security from the residential floors. Cleared Lillian's belongings from the guest room. Unsure why. Guilt gnawed deeper. Lillian hadn't returned. Her things untouched. He'd checked shelters discreetly. Nothing. She'd vanished into the city. And he deserved every second of not knowing. The doorman buzzed at 7 p.m. sharp. Mia stepped out of the elevator into the penthouse foyer. Coat dripping rain. She looked smaller here, surrounded by marble and city views that stretched forever. Alexander stood in the kitchen doorway. Apron still on. Vulnerable in a way no boardroom had ever seen him. "You cooked," she said. Surprise softening her edge. "I wanted it to feel human." He gestured to the table. "Set for two. No staff. No pretension." They ate in near silence. At first the food was good. Real. Finally, Mia spoke. "Why hide me?" Quote. He set down his fork. "Fear. Youth. Stupidity. I told myself it was to protect you from the spotlight. Truth is, I was protecting myself from judgment. From failing at something more important than business." Mia's eyes glistened. "Do you know what it's like growing up with everything except the one thing you need?" Quote. "Every day since I signed those papers." She pushed back from the table. Walked to the windows. Rain lashed the glass. "Lillian. Tell me about her." Alexander joined her, standing a respectful distance away. "She was light when I met her. I was already hardening. She tried to keep me soft. I didn't let her. You punished her for your own guilt." He nodded. "I thought she'd betrayed me first, but I betrayed her long before. With secrets. With distance." The freeze. It was cruelty disguised as justice. Mia turned to him. "I forced you to undo it. You forced me to face it." Silence again. Then, quietly, "I don't know how to do this. Be a daughter. Have a father." "Me neither." His voice broke. "But I'd like to try. If you'll let me." Mia didn't answer. Not yet. Outside, in the shadows of the building across the street, Lillian watched through binoculars from her hotel window. She'd followed Mia from the airport. Pieced together the address from cab records. Now she saw them. Together in the penthouse lights. Talking. Close. Her heart fractured and reformed in the same breath. Not an affair. A daughter. Everything made sense now. The sudden kindnesses. The restorative payments. Alexander wasn't being blackmailed by a lover. He was being redeemed by the child he'd abandoned. Tears came. Hot and sudden. Not of betrayal. Of loss. Of wasted years. She lowered the binoculars. Hands shaking. Back inside. Mia finally spoke. "I need time." "Take all you need. I'll wait." She moved toward the elevator. Then paused. "One more thing on the list. A nurse named Claire Harlow. My mother. She died when I was 12. You paid her medical bills anonymously. But you never visited." Alexander's face crumpled. "I couldn't face her. Are you? Visit her grave. Tomorrow. Leave flowers. Tell her you're sorry. Then maybe I'll come back." He nodded, unable to speak. The elevator doors closed on Mia's tear-streaked face. Alexander stood alone in the vast penthouse. The weight of decades pressing down. For the first time, he didn't pour a drink. He sat on the floor, the cold marble, and cried like the young man who'd made the worst choice of his life. Lillian watched the lights go out, one by one. Then she walked back to her hotel through the rain, soaked and shivering, but lighter somehow. Redemption wasn't linear. It was messy. Painful. Slow. But it was beginning. The next morning, Alexander drove alone to the cemetery in upstate New York where Claire was buried. He brought lilies, her favorite, from old memories, knelt in the mud, spoke aloud the apologies he'd never dared before. I was a coward. I'm sorry. I'll spend whatever time I have left making it right. For her. For Mia. He didn't notice the figure watching from the treeline. Lillian, who'd followed him one last time. She turned away before he saw her. Tears mixing with rain. The frozen empire was cracking wide open. Spring arrived in New York with hesitant warmth. Cherry blossoms drifting like pale confetti over Central Park. 4 months had passed since the cemetery visit. Since the penthouse dinner. Since the frozen empire began its slow, painful melt. Alexander stood on the park path near the Bow Bridge. Waiting. He wore a simple coat. No driver idling nearby. In his hand, a single white rose. The kind Claire used to love. Every Sunday since that rainy day at her grave. He'd come here. Not to the grave anymore. Mia had asked him to stop haunting the past instead. They met here. Neutral ground. Rebuilding on fresh earth. She appeared at the far end of the bridge. Hair lighter now. Natural brown catching sunlight. No disguise. No armor. She smiled. Small. But real. And walked toward him. You're early, she said. So are you. They walked side by side. No hurry. Conversation had grown easier. She told him about her work. Auditing nonprofits now. Using her skills for good. He told her about board meetings. But mostly about the changes. The foundation he'd renamed partly in Claire's memory. The scholarships openly bearing Mia's name. I got a letter, Mia said quietly. From the 98 partner. He wrote that the money let him see his great-grandchildren grow up without worry. He forgave you. Alexander's eyes misted. I don't deserve it. Maybe not. But you're earning it anyway. They sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Ducks glided past for a while. Neither spoke. I have something to tell you, Mia said finally. Lillian knows. He stiffened. How? Quote, I didn't tell her. She found out. Followed me. Saw us. Alexander closed his eyes. The last piece he'd dreaded. I thought she'd hate me more, he whispered. She doesn't. A new voice joined them. Soft. Familiar. Lillian stepped from the path behind the bench. She looked different. Hair shorter. Clothes simpler. Face stripped of the polished mask she'd worn for years. In her hands, 2 coffees. Alexander stood. Stunned. Mia watched. Tense. I've known for weeks, Lillian said. Handing a cup to each of them. I was angry. At first, then confused. Then proud. Proud? Alexander's voice cracked. You let someone hold you accountable. Finally, she turned to Mia. And you forced a man who thought he was untouchable to become human again. Mia's eyes filled. I didn't do it for him. At first. I know, Lillian said gently. But look what happened anyway. Alexander found his voice. Lillian, I'm sorry. For the freeze. For the years of coldness. For hiding her. For everything. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry too. For retreating into someone else's attention when I should have fought for us. We both built walls. Mia stood. I should go. This is between you two. No, Lillian said firmly. Stay. You're part of this now. Part of us. They sat together. 3 people linked by secrets. Pain. And now, tentatively, forgiveness. Lillian spoke first. I've been volunteering at the shelter where I stayed. Rosa taught me something. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing there is. Alexander reached out, hesitant, and took her hand. She didn't pull away. To Mia, I've sold the Hampton house. Too many ghosts. The proceeds are going to expand the Harlem Youth Center. In Claire's name. And yours. If you'll allow it. Mia smiled through tears. I'd like that. Months turned to seasons. The divorce papers, once inevitable, gathered dust in a drawer, unsigned. Not because they pretended the past away, but because they chose something harder. Rebuilding. Alexander stepped back from daily operations, mentoring younger leaders, focusing on restitution. One by one, the names on Mia's list received justice. Some forgave, some didn't. All were made whole. Mia moved to New York, took an apartment in Brooklyn, close enough for Sunday walks with her father, dinners with both of them. She and Lillian grew unexpectedly close. Two women who'd been invisible to the same man in different ways, now seeing each other clearly. One evening in late summer, the three of them stood on the penthouse terrace, redesigned now, warmer, filled with plants and photos. Claire's picture on the mantel, Mia's graduation photo beside it. Alexander raised a glass of sparkling water. To second chances we don't deserve, Lillian added, but take anyway. Mia completed it. And to kindness, the kind that thaws even the coldest empires. They clinked glasses as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in fire and gold. The empire wasn't frozen anymore. It breathed. It hurt. It healed. And in the quiet spaces between words, between old wounds and new beginnings, they learned the hardest lesson of all. True wealth isn't measured in billions, but in the courage to face what you've broken, and the grace to mend it, one careful piece at a time.